All right, welcome everybody to the Konflux community call. I think that this is newly rebranded as a community call on Tuesday, August 5th. This, it is a community call. So in order to contribute to the public discussion, please follow the community guidelines. We have a lot of topics on the agenda today. I am going to hand the floor over to Jordan to discuss adding the ability in Konflux to handle larger amounts of results. Jordan?
Yeah. So, like Andrew said, basically what I'm running into is I'm trying to work on Konflux as a artifact, adding an artifact storage that uses pulp with a Quay backend. And what we need to do is be able to track these artifacts as they move through Konflux using the results, so that it would have the proper chains and SLSA and all that good stuff. So trying to figure out a way to, or what would be the proper way to have a larger amount of results from these, where like the one I'm working on right now is libcpg, and like that could have by itself like 20 some RPMs to track. So taking any kind of opinions or what we should do about that. Or questions? Yes.
So the challenge is that you're producing a lot of artifacts in one task, and if you were to emit a result for each one of those, you would quickly hit the limits on result size in Tectone. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah. So I was playing around with it, and it seems like 4 is like the limit, and then it starts just deleting results out of the results.
Yeah,
thing.
it's weird. It's a complicated logic, but yes. So one of the things that this has come up a couple times, and one of the ideas that we may want to explore is, and this will require changes in Tectone chains, but the idea of using an OCI artifact. So if you're familiar with the OCI spec, is there's this image manifest that is just a JSON that has links to different layers in an image. An OCI artifact is pretty much the same format, but instead of layers, it links to blobs. So these blobs can be individual files. So your RPM build task could produce this special manifest that links to all the blobs, where each blob is a particular RPM. So you could have 20, 30 in there. I think you run into issues when you reach like 2000, but that's probably not what's going to happen. And in the result, all you do is you emit a reference to the OCI artifact, which is a single image reference. Now, that should work today in your task, but the problem is that chains will sign and attest only that wrapper OCI artifact. You won't do for each one of those individual files. And maybe that's okay, maybe that's not okay for your use case, but there is some work that we want to do in chains, which is grant the ability to crack open this manifest and then actually add the digest of the blobs to the salsa provenance.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Brian, do you want to say something?
Yeah. Louis, I know you've been talking about doing that a while. I think it's a good idea, but I think I'd like to see that go even further, potentially, that we would create a companion TEP to that proposed change to chains and try to make it more official in Tecton to adopt the ability to emit results natively into an OCI artifact produced by the pipeline. Because the way I was thinking about this yesterday, and there's like a couple forces that are working against each other. I think it's becoming more common to see smaller and smaller purpose-built containers, which are very convenient and fast to download. But using them in Tekton requires you to divide your pipeline into more steps. And we've been doing exactly the opposite. We've been trying to condense our steps into less steps to save results space. And in addition, like if we want to try to build a library of like reusable step actions, it would be better if we weren't always concerned with like trying to save results space. And like it feels like the OCI artifact is like a way out of this like results space trap we're in.
Yeah, I think that's maybe as you say, it's like going further. But like if you're building images with code, for example, in one command you can build like 5-6 images, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if an OCI artifact capturing references to each one of those images is the right approach. That doesn't seem like it follows the OCI spec. But we should probably explore this a little bit more. Now, for Jordan's use case, do we care if the digest of the RPM itself is not in the Salsa province?
I think the idea is that the digest would need to be tracked so that we can make sure that nobody has swapped anything out inside Quay.
Yeah, I think the digest of that wrapper artifact would be tracked. And within the Konflux ecosystem, I think that's probably sufficient, because when you're trying to release that RPM, the reference that you pass along is a reference to that OCI artifact wrapper, not to the individual RPMs. And that OCI artifact will have references to the RPMs themselves by digest. So we do have the immutability aspect of it. I just don't know if outside of Konflux, if things will care about this.
Yeah, I was going to say essentially that in a different way, Luis, that what you need in the provenance is to have parity between the build steps and the release, the build task and the release task. If the release task is capable of consuming the entire artifact that was built from a single task, then that is essentially the digest, which would need to be verified and have provenance for it. If you can take that single artifact and extract it and ship all the individual bits to their respective places, then you don't necessarily need provenance for all those individual bits. You just need to have the provenance on that immutable envelope.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's kind of like what I was thinking as well. When I was originally putting this together and trying to figure out how to make it work, I created a results JSON with like the pulp reference and the Quay reference with the Shade 256 to make sure that when we do release that we could match those and make sure that nothing has been changed or moved or whatever.
Jordan, I'm assuming this will be done by a specialized RPM build task. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I don't know if are you working on that task? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. We're adding it to the currently there's a Quay upload that just creates an OCI artifact, and that's a single like image URL, but I'm trying to make it so it tracks all the pulp artifacts as well, so that when we do a release that will all show up.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're looking for an example, I did something like what I talked about in this task when I was building Python wheels, but I think the same concept apply. And in that task, there are 2 steps. Well, there's multiple steps, but you probably only care about the last step in there, which is the one that creates that OCI artifact. And I think most of that can probably be applicable to you as is.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, I'll look at that and see what I can do with it. I think
Thanks.
Related question is how are you handling multi-arch for RPMs? Will each one be built in its own, like a different instance of the task?
Tomasz got the answer to that.
Yeah, all the architectures are built as part of the same build. So that one result artifact that Jordan was talking about will contain all these arches. And on the build side, yes, they have like separate build tasks. There are specific build tasks. We are using multi-platform controller.
Okay, so within the same exact task, so in the pipeline, there will only be one RPM build task. And then that one task will produce all the RPMs for all the supported arches.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Thank you.
I think I'm done.
Thanks, Jordan. Louis, you have the next topic since Emil is still on the call.
Yep.
Cleaning up the default and required tasks.
Yeah, so if we look in the agenda, and I'm gonna share my screen, share the agenda, because I think it'll be easier to talk. Okay, is that big enough for folks? Cool. All right, so I was just going through some of the tasks in the default build pipelines, and some of this stuff kind of like seems weird to me, so I just wanted to have a quick conversation about it. So the first one, and I'm just going to touch on this because there's already a pull request that has some approvals, and the show SBOM task. I think this goes back to the Stone Soup days where we wanted to have an easy way to demonstrate the SBOM and whatnot. So it seems like the overall consensus is to, I haven't heard any pushback about removing this task. So if you do, let me know. The other one is the init task. And I think historically this did more than what it does today. I believe at some point it was responsible for creating secrets, push secrets, and all kinds of stuff. Today, its only purpose seems to be to determine whether or not the tag that you want to build for already exists. And then if it does exist, it emits a certain result. And then in the other tasks in the pipeline, you can have conditionals to skip the build if it already exists. So my suggestion on this is that first of all, you should probably not be a required task. If someone doesn't want to run that task, I think it's perfectly valid. But I would like to suggest even a step further of removing that from the default pipeline as well. We don't need to push this task on folks if they don't want to use it. Yeah, there's also a parameter to the task that can cause it to force skip. So the detection of whether you should skip is based on whether the tag already exists or if you passed in this special parameter. So any comments on that init task, Andrew?
I think that it makes sense to remove that from the default pipeline. Responding to what Brian said in the chat, when we use this skip checks parameter, the tasks should use that parameter directly. They shouldn't use it like there's nothing that passes through the init task. But I know that Brian has been trying to work on some things related to reusing built artifacts, and like I think that regardless of the direction that goes, I think that's a better path to take instead of trying to use this rebuild in the init task. And related to show SBOM really quick, every time I manage a pipeline, I always remove that task. So I also support that decision.
I in the work I was doing, I had to override the behavior of that task and set rebuild to true all the time, or nothing worked. So, yeah.
Nicola?
Yeah, thank you. So I completely would agree with the possibility to remove show with BOM and show summary tasks. Regarding init, so it could be a little bit more tricky. So there are a number of reasons. Yeah, we can move some useful parameters to say be a pipeline parameter or something like that. However, there is another point that we need a task for migrations to do. So that's touches how pipeline migration tool works. So we attach a migration to a task usually, and that works. But if we need an insert a new task in user pipeline, that need a fictional migration in a task, and the most logical place was init for such kind of migrations so far. So of course we came up with another solution, but yeah, that's yet another point. And also we might need some logic to do before the whole pipeline. So I'm in doubt. Maybe we can remove it, maybe not. I think it requires a little bit more of investigation. But yeah, show as bomb and show summary probably should go away, and probably we can even deprecate. Well, not really deprecate in terms of conforma check, but stop updating them, like archive the tasks, maybe. What do you think?
Nicola, what is the use case that you have in mind for doing something before the build starts? Like, which will be part of the init task?
Well, I don't have something specific in mind, just for a general, purpose.
Okay. And I think regarding the comment on migration, I think the proposal here is to not. I'm not proposing that we go and remove this task from everyone that already uses them, but it's new users onboarding wouldn't get them by default. They still can if they want to. But I think to your point is if 6 months from now we decide that we do have to have some kind of init functionality, then we would have to create some migration to add that task for folks that didn't have it.
Yes, that's another point, but first point was if we need to add another task in the pipeline that should be mandatory to our users, then we need a migration. And usually it was migration for init that added the task. And if we make it optional, then only users who have it would receive that new task. So that's the problem.
Yeah. So it sounds like we don't really have consensus today on the init task.
Yeah, I must add that build team is also looking into build pipeline refactoring. So with build definition decentralization, but we first plan to, move all the tasks away from build definitions, and then when we go back to build pipeline, so the initial plan was to remove all the checks and move it to integration pipeline and revise all this stuff. So we thank you for doing it sort of ahead of build team. Thanks. But yeah, we're planning it, and we can do all this issue on build team side, like handling all this removal, migration, deprecation, whatever makes sense, or we would decide to do. So a little bit later when build team would move the build pipelines out of build definitions. So that should be the date.
Okay. The other task that we have is the ecosystem ecosystem cert pre-flight checks. This one is not a required task, but it looks like should it be marked as required? It's included in the default pipeline. So I don't have much context on this particular task, but maybe this one is good as is. Andrew?
Yeah, I think this one's good as is. There were some discussions in the past about making it required. That requirement discussion, it's on a specific policy level, but I think we still wanted to include it by default because it does illustrate, right? It runs checks against many best practices. So this is already a check that we provide to others, and so they wanted to also provide it here.
Josh?
Just to add to what Andrew said, I know it checks for a lot of best practices, but right now it's only checking containers. For operators, they don't have it enabled, and because it requires a cluster deployment. So yeah, that's the status of it. Like, we don't know how to proceed further.
Okay.
Right. And I think because it doesn't support operators or bundles, that many use cases I've seen where they have bundles that actually disable a task because it fails. But it can provide useful information for other images, other artifacts that are built.
Makes sense. At the very least, we could make it passing for operator bundles. Like, although it can be a no op, but it still should succeed, and then we can make it mandatory in the pipeline.
I think we can have that conversation separately, even if it passes for operator bundles. There's some reticence to making it required by default, just because of the amount of work that it might require to make it passing for everybody.
Okay.
And to clarify, it's not a required task, but if you include a task and it fails, then you're going to get a conformer violation.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's how we enforce it as a best practice, but those best practices aren't necessarily required.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like that task needed some conversation. So for now, let's just leave it as is. And the last task I wanted to cover is show summary. And this is very similar to show SBOM. it is not a required task. We removed that a while back. The OCI, the trusted artifacts pipelines don't include it at all because it does require a PVC. And this is just to provide some summary information. So my suggestion here is to just remove this from the build pipelines. Got a thumbs up. I think Mikola mentioned support for this earlier too. Another thumbs up. So I'm going to mark this one as remove it. Okay. And then for init, I think the action item is leave it as is for now. And show as bomb, it's going to get removed as part of that pull request. Yes, Andrew?
How about for init if we include it by default but don't make it required? I guess that would mean that some people would be able to remove it from their own pipelines if they don't find it useful, and that would prevent the migration scripts from being able to use it as a key. But yeah, Nicola.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about optional part of the init. So is it just thoughts on the go? But it seems to me that we should either keep it as a mandatory or remove altogether. Because if we make it optional, then again, we would defeat that migration stuff within it. It's not like a huge problem. We can use, let's say, git clone for this purpose. It would look somewhat weird to end user, but yeah, it would work technically. And yet another reason to not to make it optional is that some next tasks would be dependent on the results of init. They might be dependent as they do now. And in that case, we would have more variations of build pipeline, which would be harder to support, harder to migrate, and in general cause a trouble. So it's either way, keep or remove, but not in the middle place. Okay, maybe within the build team, we would analyze it more and maybe we would remove it in the end, like.
Thanks, Nicola.
To see what's happening. Yep. Okay, thank you.
That'd be great.
Thanks, everyone. That's all I got.
Thanks, Louis, for raising it. Rodrigo, I think you are the next one on the agenda.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to share my screen to be easier to talk about these topics. Just give me a sec. Is the font size all right? Can everyone see it? Cool. So, hey guys, Rodrigo, I'm software engineer. I'm part of the Konflux UI team. And we just would like to share a few improvements that we made related to contributing to our project and also somehow related to our code review process. The first thing, and probably most important, we've finally added the contributing file to our repository. And here we try to add everything that would be necessary for anyone that would be interested in contributing to the project, so they can find information about the project structure, some best practices. And we hope that it's to be a nice starting point for anyone that would be interested in contributing to our Konflux UI project. And the second thing that we added is the cursor rules. Given the increasing amount of AI-generated PRs or PRs that are assisted by AI, we noticed that in some of these generated code, there's no like code was not following our project architecture or some of our guidelines. Needed to make the reviewers a hard time just to go through and make the suggestions and try to make the code in a better shape. So one of the things that we added to the project were those cursor rules, and with that would at least give some extra guidance to cursor to take that into consideration when generating a new code or suggesting some refactor or something like that. I'm not going to go over all of it. I'm just going to open one rule as an example. And here we just put everything that could be related when generating a new React component, such as, for example, telling cursor to always try to use pattern-find components instead of using raw HTML. With that, we'd make sure that the code generated for a new component or a new page would always have pattern find, and so it would follow our design system and our styling. So we avoid such issues when having an AI-generated PR. And here we have a bunch of other things related to styling. Also, all of these rules, we try to create them based on what we described in our contributing file, so it is clear about the usage of it. So it makes sense according to what you would see as a contributor to the file. And the last thing we integrated to our repository, the CodeRabbit AI. We are going to use this tool to help during code review processes, and it can catch a few minor things or some bugs. And here I'm going to share some examples of some interactions that we had with it in the previous week or two. And this first example, it was actually a good catch from CodeRabbit. It pointed out some error that would be happening when I'm using the component here. It pointed out that I'm trying to use the component before even checking if I finished fetching the component and it finished loading, and if there's any error. So it could end up in some runtime error in React because I would try to use the spec field from undefined here. So it was actually a good catch, and it prevented some bug that would happen in production. But also it can catch some smaller things, like, for example, here it just pointed out one typo in namespace, and it shows where the variable was created and where it was imported from. So you can fix these minor things, or some small refactors like this one. It pointed out that we added a test case that already existed in the file. So it just suggested we can remove this. It's like a duplicated test case. And the last example, we can also sort of interact with the CodeRabbit in your pull request. You can point out some code, some line of code, and ask something. In this case, in this PR, I was changing some regex, and it could be a bit complicated, so I added a comment on it, and I asked the CodeRabbit if this comment looks good enough or some improvements, and the CodeRabbit just share a few things it could improve in the comment and so on. So it was also a nice suggestion. Our plan with this tool is to use it during a period of 3 months to try to gather feedback from inside the team, if it was good or not, what are the pros and cons. And then, depending on the feedback, we would continue using it or just remove it from the repository. And I think if it's that interesting, you can share with the broader team our experience using this tool. It could be useful for other repositories as well. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm not sure if Adan or Sahil are in the call and they want to add something. Or Andrew?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I noticed that you have a dev container in the repo as well, which is helpful if you're using Cursor, because then you sandbox what Cursor can actually do inside that containerized environment. Do those Cursor rules work by default with that dev container? Are they loaded into the dev container as well?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about dev container, but by default, Cursor should use that rules in their knowledge base. Sahil?
Yeah, so the cursor rules are included in the directory. So if the directory is in the sandbox itself, by default, which it would be if you're creating the dev container from the Konflux UI repository. So it should follow those rules automatically.
Perfect, thanks. I like using dev containers, especially if using Cursor.
Cool. Thank you, guys. That's all.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Ralph, I believe that you are up next.
All right. I just went to GitHub and I got a 500 error.
Yeah,
Yes.
GitHub is down.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well then all I can do is explain verbally. We've been talking about it off and on over the past few months, but it feels like the ADR process is stuck. We, excuse me, variety of perspectives on it. We maybe have too many owners of the ADR approval right now. And that was set up that way, to adding as many people as possible with the hope that people would feel empowered to approve things and make them move faster without bottlenecking on a small number of people. But it seems that we maybe now have a tragedy of the commons situation where everybody has some approval, but nobody maybe feels authorized to approve something else because it's unclear. So to that end, the Konflux Governance Committee, we were talking late last week and some yesterday. We want to reboot the ADR process. There's a doc here. When GitHub comes back, you can go and take a look at it with some specific details. But the one takeaway is we want to change the code owners for ADRs so that it's just the Konflux Governance Committee that approves them. And I say the hope with that is that we can streamline it. If the responsibility is clear, then if there's a backlog of ADRs, then we know exactly whose problem it is. It's the KGCs to take care of processing those. We added some clarity in the proposal about a request for comments period. So when an ADR is proposed, there'll be a clear 2-week period where it gets announced on this call and we seek comments for 2 weeks, at which point a decision should be made either to extend the request for comments period again for another 2 weeks, or to reject the ADR, or to approve it as is, and some other details in there. Please go look. We don't want this to be the last and only revision to that process. It's a starting point, I think, for rebooting it. So that when we get things flowing, then if there's things about that process we don't like, we can revise and change them, of course, in the future. I see hands. I want to say one other comment, which is that there's a thing I don't like about the proposal is there's this centralization of authority for approving ADRs, and I very much like the way in which the culture of our group, I feel like, is that there's many leaders within the community that feel empowered and entitled to have opinions and make decisions about all sorts of things. And this signifies, in some ways, a move away from that. I don't want that to be forever. I'd like to reboot it now and then see if we can figure out how to restructure ourselves so we can delegate authority out to record decisions about different parts of the project, but while still having clear responsibility for it, so that things don't get kind of lost in this murky territory of not being sure whose responsibility it is to make sure things get decided and recorded. Those are my thoughts on it. I see hands. I see Mikola first, and then Andrew.
Thank you, Ralph, for the proposal. Honestly, I haven't time to look through it yet, but so I agree that we need more streamlined control over decisions. However, my question is how we would make sure that some commands or requesting changes from community, from developers, will not be ignored. Like how we would make sure that ADR author would respond to every thread, because right now, at least what happens with some ideas I was reviewing, that we have a conversation with the author, then I ask a question and it didn't get the answer. So I'm not approving because my question isn't answered and it's stuck. Yeah. So how we would make sure that we wouldn't merge it until the response came, or at least some reasonable, decision would be made, just to not ignore people. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll Andrew, do you want to go and respond to that first, or should I respond first?
I mean, I think that I can certainly respond to it. I think what Louis said makes sense as well. I think that it will just come down to judgment as well. In my opinion, the governance committee isn't here to be the only authoritative source. I think that we're here to help guide the community and to listen to the community. And to that end, how I see this working as well is seeking and requesting the review from various sub-teams explicitly, and in many situations deferring to the preference of those teams. It's not the governance committee isn't there to say this is accepted based on what we determine. We're here to help the conversation, and if there's things that can't be resolved, help resolve them.
I wanted to add and say that I think the KGC, there's this bit of a 2-week cadence timing built into the description of the process. So like, let's say, make a scenario out of it. Let's say that I file, no, I'm on the KGC, so let's taking out of the scenario. Let's say Yash can pick your name. Yash files an ADR and it has its text there. Mikola, you go to review it and ask questions, but Yash doesn't respond because Yash doesn't see or gets busy with something else. And 2 weeks go by. If at that point Yash hasn't gotten back to you and the KGC looks at it and we don't know any good reason why Yash hasn't gotten back to you, then it's the KGC's responsibility to just close it. Close it as deferred. The ADR is out of consideration to get it out of the queue. I think in the positive case, if we think that it's in a situation where it should be merged or is getting close to being merged or accepted, but your comment or question doesn't have a resolution, then Louis' comment and sidebar, I think, would stand. We'd need to make sure they all get resolved.
Okay, let's try this way.
Cool. The MR or the PR, sorry, is up. Everybody, when you're on GitHub or when GitHub comes back, comment and review the text, see if there's things you like about it, anything you want to tweak. Brian, you and I were working on it yesterday. Since then, Andrew made comments about clearly documenting ADR states, and I updated the text to include that. So you should take a look to make sure that matches what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's cool. As soon as it works.
That's all I have. Andrew, I yield back to you.
All right, thanks, Ralph. And Mikola, you have what I assume is going to be the last topic because Neil hasn't joined us. So I assume that Neil's topic is going to be deferred to next week. So
Yeah,
yep.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a quite short topic. I just would like the community to know that build team is trying to solve a situation with sharing CI configuration between some Konflux repositories. So the main drive here was that we are trying to decentralize build definitions, and all the tasks of each team goes into a separate repository. However, we currently have common CI configuration, for example, OCI TA versions of the tasks auto-generated readmes and stuff like that. So we have number of CI configs that is applied, but when we move things to different repos, so the simplest way would be to copy paste the definitions, but this is quite dangerous because if we would need to do some adjustments, we would have some drifts in the configs and that would be a mess. So Adam has done investigation on this topic, and there is a design doc linked in the agenda. So guys, please take a look. We will implement his suggestions soon if there is no objections or ideas to improve that. And finally, we would encourage other teams to use it as well, because otherwise, if it's only build, it sort of doesn't make sense. So please take a look. Thank you.
Thanks, Mikola, for this, and for Adam, who's not here.
Yeah, he is in PTO. That's it. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to contact build team.
That's the end of the agenda as we have it filled out. Are there any other topics that people would like to raise or any discussions people would like to go back to? Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, just a reminder like when we talked about ADRs, there is open ADR about GitOps changes. We decided that like a month ago that we will close it at 15. So folks, if you want to like voice your opinions or anything, don't hesitate and write your and comment on the ADR now until like before the 15th of August. Just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that there is this ADR.
Thanks, Adam. Are there any other topics that people wanted to raise? All right, then I will stop the recording and we'll see you all next week.